BS-Free Witchcraft is a production of the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network. Nerd and Tie produces podcasts ranging from actual play to true crime, and you can find more at nerdandtie.com or join our Discord by going to nerdandtie.com/Discord. Welcome to BS-Free Witchcraft, your monthly guide to the modern witchcraft movement, minus a lot of the usual, well, bullshit. I'm your host, Trey Dorn. Before we get started on this month's topic, I do want to remind you that in July, we are doing the annual Q&A episode, where I answer questions from listeners like you. I assume you're listening to this, or else how else do you know I'm saying these words? Anyways, because my schedule is very tight this time of year, I do need any questions for the episode to arrive by, I'm going to say, July 10th. If you want me to answer your question on the show, you need to submit your questions by July 10th. So I have time to record the episode and get it up in time. So, if you want to submit a question, you just go to bsfreewitchcraft.com/contact and fill out the form, and that will shoot me an email, and I will read that. Additionally, if you want to send your questions in over Tumblr, my Tumblr asks, I will also count, even if I've answered your question there, I'll still count those as possible questions for the show. Or if you want to send me a message on the official BS Free Witchcraft Facebook page at facebook.com/BSFreeWitchcraft, that's also acceptable. But the best way to do it is the contact form. So bsfreewitchcraft.com/contact. It can be about anything. It can be about the show. It can be about questions you have about witchcraft. It can be about anything. And if you're worried, I answer all these questions anonymously. So you don't have to worry about, like, if some people I know have been worried about, like, on the off chance there's someone who they don't want them to know that they are a witch. I don't say your names, and I remove identifiable information from the questions if you want me to. So, I love answering these questions every year. I think it's a really fun thing to do on the show. So, yeah. Get me your questions by July 10th, and I will answer them. Now on to the actual content that you showed up here for. And that's, it's about fighting a god, I guess. I don't know. I recorded this bit after I recorded the rest of the episode because I realized I forgot to do the intro. So here's Trey from like an hour ago. You know, ever since I started this show a couple years ago, one of the topics I get asked for a lot is advice on working with gods, from witches who presumably work with gods. Not all witches do. And I'm always been like loath to actually cover this topic. One, because it puts us squarely in the religious witchcraft, but it's not even like, I'm a Wiccan, and while I believe in the Wiccan god and goddess, I don't really like follow deities. Like, the relationship between Wicca and polytheism is really complex. There's kind of an attitude I loathe a little bit. I'm just gonna admit I loathe a little bit the attitude of, my God is just your God. Your God is just my God in a funny hat. Or, that sort of thing. Where there's this tendency of some Wiccans believe that, like, the god is a representation of all gods, and the goddess is the representation of all goddesses. And at that point, I'm like, well, why do you have two gender constructs in the first place? But that's a question that my philosophy on the Wiccan god and goddess, you can go back to the gender and witchcraft episode if you really want to know my full conception of that. So I really, like, I view the god and goddess as kind of like universal forces more than as like the literal standard deity. This is not to say that I don't believe in the possibility of other deities. Like, I don't have that exclusionist mindset that, like, I have a belief in higher powers that are out there. But I don't specifically necessarily, I don't not believe in other gods, the ability of those to exist. I just don't also believe in them. I'm agnostic towards everybody else's gods. That's that's the answer. You know what? Yeah, like I used to have stronger opinions on the Norse gods because when I was a younger Wiccan and I borrowed faces from my god and goddess, it's one of the places I pulled from because that's where my ancestry comes from, that part of the world. But like, I don't have a strong opinion on Thor. I don't have a strong opinion on Odin. I don't have a strong opinion on Loki. Whether or not Frigg, don't know. Like, whether or not these deities exist or don't exist, I have no opinion. So like, and we recognize though that plenty of witches deal with this. So that's why when people ask me like, well, tell me about working gods, I'm like, I don't really know. So I'd have to go out and do a bunch of research on like the actual mechanics of that kind of witchcraft, because it's just not my bag. And like, I'm not opposed to doing episodes about things that I haven't specifically researched, but like, yeah, I'm not opposed to that, but it also makes it a harder topic to cover. Like, I don't usually do a lot of candle magic, but I did a whole episode on candle magic because I thought it was an interesting topic to cover. So all of that said, my rambling for like almost 4 minutes about this is we are to a degree going to talk about gods this episode. Yay. And it all started the reason why I'm covering this is a couple of things on Tumblr. Not even gonna lie, it's just a couple of things on Tumblr happened, and it's that spurned me in this direction. So let's talk about what the heck happened on my Tumblr. Okay, so I was making a joke. I occasionally, if you follow me on Tumblr, traegorn.tumblr.com, if you follow me on Tumblr, you'll know that I have, on occasion, made effectively witchcraft shitposts. Like, I wrote my broken window curse, which sets it up like, to explain a joke and thus make it less funny. Sets it up like formatting a regular spell, and then just ends with, and one of the components is a rock, and the spell ends with throw the rock through the person's window who you want to curse with the broken window spell. That's it. I got sick of seeing all of these like types of witches posts, like, oh, you know, are you the kitchen witch? Are you the green witch? And look, using those descriptors for yourself is fine, but I don't like those list posts, because I feel like people have this weird habit of like, they need to like fit into their category, and it's really limiting when you're trying to form something like a witchcraft spell. It's, whether it's your Myers-Briggs personality type or your Hogwarts house, people really want to like have a nice little label. And I feel like that's not necessarily applicable to every situation, and I think witchcraft is one of them. So I wrote a joke type of witch's master post, which has a little through line about the Steve witch. And again, these are just jokes. So me, being me, I decided to write after seeing a bunch of genuine beginner witch tips posts, which actually didn't bother me. Like, most of them didn't bother me, but there were a bunch of unsourced ones passing around that had advice that I didn't really agree with. Like, a bunch of them were like, never cast curses. I'm like, as a beginner, curses aren't any worse as a beginner spell than they are as an advanced spell. Like, look, if you're morally against cursing people, it doesn't matter whether someone's a beginner or an experienced witch, you're against that in general, right? And I've seen people like argue that like, oh, curses are too advanced. I'm like, why are they more advanced? Like, some beginner goes out there and does a healing spell and they do it wrong, they could hurt someone, right? Like, in theory, assuming that you jump into the supposition that all of this stuff works equally. right? A screwed up healing spell could be bad. A screwed up love spell could be bad. But you screw up a curse, you're already trying to hurt someone, right? Like, that's the goal. You screw up a curse, worst thing you're going to do is accidentally give your enemy a better day. So that's why, so it's a little sick. That's the context. So I decided to write a joke beginner witch tips that was just supposed to be funny. And I thought, what is the most ridiculous thing I could put at the top of a list? What is the most ridiculous thing I could put at the beginning of a list on beginner witch tips that people make everybody know it's a joke? And so the first 3 words are fight a god. I wrote fight a god. Just go for it, dude. Why not? If you fail, just keep trying until you either win or the god gives up and moves on. That's the second tip was learn to cast some protective wards. That god has friends and they're going to come for you. You best be ready. Like, those are the first 2 tips on this list. And immediately, I got reblogs from people who were like, you shouldn't tell people to fight a god. That's terrible. Like, let's get some context here, guys. People read this list that starts with fight a god and thought I was being serious, but we'll get to that. Anyways, I immediately had people saying, please don't fight gods, like, ever. And now I read this, and my immediate thought is like, first off, you're yucking my yum here. This is a joke. Like, can we, like, just have fun for, like, 2 seconds? And so I just, like, I'll play along. I will play along. Because I've said I'm just going to do this in character, because I can either get mad at someone, like, being kind of a jerk, or I can just make it part of the joke. And so I made a joke about, God, what is my exact words? I made a joke about Apollo having an OnlyFans. I did call them a god simp, because I was like, what is it? I said, sounds like something a god simp would say. I bet you subscribe to Apollo's OnlyFans. Now, to be fair, in my defense, I was not aware that this person was a Hellenic pagan when I made that joke. I did not look at their blog at all. I just reblogged from their thing because, like, they're being a little bit of a jerk. And so I didn't know I was literally directly calling out their pantheon. I just, like, there are two sets of gods that I know decently, and those are the Norse gods from, like, my own, like, research as an adult, and then there are the Hellenic gods, the Greek gods, which I know from, you know, being a nerdy child who read a bunch of Greek mythology. And so, like, I mean, and if you're gonna make a joke about someone having an OnlyFans, Apollo's the one to make the joke about, Mr. bisexual stalker weirdo. We're talking about a god who literally accidentally killed his boyfriend throwing a discus or whatever, a disc, and then but also, like, the whole reason why, like, the laurel wreaths are associated with Apollo is because Eros pulled a trick on Apollo where he made Apollo fall in love with this girl, and then he made sure that the girl would never fall in love with Apollo. And rather than just taking no for an answer, Apollo decided to stalk this woman until she finally got to the point where she asked her father, a river god, to transform her into a laurel tree. And that's how much she wanted to get away from creepy Apollo. And Apollo then started wearing laurel wreaths in dedication to her, this woman who wanted nothing to do with them. So, like, if you think I'm going to feel a minute of sympathy for Apollo of all gods. You got like, nah, man, I'm gonna make fun of Apollo. Just gonna do it. So, anyways, and this, they got really like, they told me that was really disrespectful to say that Apollo and OnlyFans, and so I told them not to slut shame Apollo. They got mad at me being disrespectful to the gods, and that was a theme that kept coming up from, like, no matter how many people, like, so many people jumped on this post and were like, don't fight gods, you'll get further with respect, and like this whole, like, you have to respect the gods, and you have to, like you know, that they should be venerated, and I'm just like, why? And this is like, so to kind of, to wrap this around, to explain, there is something I wrote just as a thing that came to me, was like, at some point the ideas of worshiping a god and believing in a god got conflated, right? The idea that I believe in this god, therefore I worship this god. And it's nonsense. This, I think, is really this comes from a very Christian perspective. Because I don't really, I haven't known enough Muslims to know what their situation is in this. I have met enough Jewish people to know that it doesn't come from them. So, I mean, there are probably Jewish people where it does come from, but this is really universal in Christianity. So I'm gonna pin it on them, because usually if there's something bad in in America, if there's something wrong with American culture and it comes from a religion, it's Christianity's fault. That's just, they're the dominant religion, so it's usually their fault. This is nothing personal against people who have a genuine faith in Christianity, and I'm not trying to be, but like, this is the culture we exist in, right? We can't, to deny that would be dishonest. And this is really Christian idea that believing in God is worshiping God. The fact that faith alone redeems in some versions of Christianity, where that faith alone without good acts can get you into heaven with some versions of Christianity, right? So like this idea that believing in a God is worshiping a God, and it's not the same thing. Like if I don't really have a strong belief in any particular deity, but if you presented me direct evidence that, say, Apollo was real, or Artemis was real, or Odin was real, like if they showed up in front of me, I'd be like, okay, I believe that exists. And I would go about my day, because I don't worship that god, right? Like, I can believe something exists without, like, worshiping it. I believe in the dresser in my bedroom. I don't worship at it. It's a dresser. It holds my stuff. When a witch interacts with a god, whether you're borrowing favor from them or like anything, you're still just, the whole point is that I guess, like, from my point of view, like, part of the whole point in Witchcraft is that we're equals. Everyone's an equal. Like, there are things that are more powerful than other things. Like, I can't take a tiger in a fight, but that doesn't mean I think that, you know, we're still both things, right? That's a really weird way to put it. And I think with polytheism, you have to, like, you can't just, if you're, and correct me if I'm wrong, you got a feedback episode next month if you feel like writing something in right now. But you can believe in a god without worshiping and dedicating yourself to a god. And in fact, if anything, like, I think that that's probably more important, that you don't, like, just, like, you have to be okay with talking shit about your gods, man. Like, it's just So the funny thing is that the further I went into this, right, like the further that this discussion went forward, the more I became certain that fighting a god is probably a good beginner witch tip. Like, this began as a joke. This began as Trey shitposts on the internet for fun. Here's a ridiculous thing that you shouldn't do. And I thought about my own experience as a young witch, and I had an encounter with something that was far more powerful than I was ready to deal with. I wouldn't describe it as a god. Not even close, but like I had an encounter with something that was far beyond what I could handle. And as a person, as a person who has grown in the last 25 years, like it's not something that I would be scared of now. It is something I 100% could handle. And frankly, I probably could have handled it. I was able to handle that situation, just a few years later, but I cut off more than I could chew. I got in a fight with something. I picked a fight with something that was bigger than me, and that's at the time, and it sounds way more dramatic than it is, but in any case, dealing with that situation made me a better witch. Like, I learned how to ward and protect, and things that I had kind of like taken the slow path on accelerated my learning in those things, and now it's the sort of thing that I wouldn't be worried about in a heartbeat, and I could easily teach anyone on how to not have to worry about that sort of thing in a heartbeat. It probably in an afternoon, because I had enough experience, but I learned it the hard way. And learning it the hard way of biting off more than I could chew is really what made me, in many ways, a witch. So I turned around from, fight a god is funny to do it, fight a god, do it. Like, I'm suddenly, what a brilliant idea. And I know that it's probably not, but whatever. Actually, the point is that you try things and you fail, and that's fine. Like, I think, if anything, I've been clear on is that it's perfectly fine to screw up everything in witchcraft and magic, and that's how you learn to be a better witch. And also, Apollo has an OnlyFans. He 100% has an OnlyFans. If Apollo walks this earth, Apollo has an OnlyFans. The only reason why Apollo wouldn't have an OnlyFans is if Apollo does not exist. That's the solution. And don't give me this platonic ideal conception of the Greek gods. Plato was a smart guy, but I've read The Republic, and he was halfway up his own ass half the time anyways. He makes lots of good points. I'm not trying to say that the allegory of the cave is bad. It's great. It's genius. It's just that he also makes a lot of he makes a lot of arguments that are completely based on his own assumptions when he talks about the gods. So I'm just saying, if you want to talk about Plato, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I've read Plato, I've read Aristotle. I don't remember 90% of it, but I did at one point. I have a degree in political science. It's part of the... Anyways, you have to read The Republic. Everybody, at least in my university, we all did. Technically, there was probably some way to get out of it, but I never found the way to avoid that class. So yeah, whether you work with gods or don't work with gods, I think if I believed, if I found a patron deity, or I found of any kind, you have to view that interaction as equals, right? You have to look at that, and because you're the witch, you are making a demand of a god, and you have to think you're hot shit if you're going to do that, right? You have to accept that you're on their level, because anything else is just that. Yeah, so be confident, fight a god if you have to. I'm not saying and also everyone's fist fight or something. I'm dude, you can... Telling a god to fuck off. If I told you to fuck off, you'd say we're having a fight, right? It doesn't have to be anything more than that. I'm just saying, like, when I say fight a god, like, it doesn't mean like you have to like go into this, like, we're not talking like, some grandiose, I mean, if you want, I guess if you're capable and want to do some weird grandiose magical battle with a god, go for it. But you can also just tell them to fuck off when they're not doing what you want. Like, that's, fight is a broad word. Jesus. Like, everyone's like, these are terrible beginner witch tips. And I'm like, are they? Because, like, I didn't curse people in the 90s. I will admit. I was a young Wiccan and had bad sources about the history of the threefold rule. And so I was like, oh, I can't do negative magic. I was so dumb. But everything on that beginner's list was something besides the curses. And I encourage the curses now as a more experienced witch. All the other stuff is stuff I did effectively in the 90s. So it's like, just do it. Just do it. You can't end up like me if you don't do the dumb stuff I did when I was a teenager. This is the worst advice. I'm going to have to call this episode not what I was going to call it. I'll go with something more relevant to what I ended up saying. Because I had a whole outline, guys, and we are like this far in and we're almost done, and I completely abandoned it just in the first 5 minutes. So fight a god if you want to. Also, like, okay, so this is just one last thing. The people who are like, oh my god, don't. Like, I'm like, are you telling me that the person, like, first off, the people who are willing to go fight a god were always going to end up fighting a god. The people who are going to read that and not, they're the people who were never going to fight a god. So, yeah, just go fight a god. Or not. I don't know. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this month. Remember, next month is the annual Q&A episode, and you can submit a question by going to bsforwitchcraft.com/contact. Or if you just go to bsforwitchcraft.com, there's a thing on the menu that says contact. If you use that form, I will answer your questions. I really like doing this, so I want more questions, guys. So send them in. All right. Remember, this show is brought to you by listeners like you through the show's Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/TRAEGORN. By becoming a Patreon contributor for even just $1 a month, you get access to episodes like this a whole week earlier. So it's actually like a week and a day, because I usually still like upload them on a Friday instead of Saturday. But it's a whole week earlier. And I want to give a special thanks to our $10 contributors of Stephanie Graves, Mary Stowell, Lindsay Dosey, Bruce Norville, and Courtney, who's our newest one this month. Now, obviously not everyone can give at that level, but even just a $1 contribution really helps this show go forward. But, if you can't afford to, I understand. It's, I don't know if you noticed, but the world's a garbage fire and we're all just trying to make by. You can just support the show by sharing this episode with everyone you know. Just harass the heck out of them. Come on. Also, you can follow the show on social media. Again, I'm on Tumblr at traegorn.tumblr.com. You can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/traegorn. And you can follow the show on Facebook at facebook.com/bsfreewitchcraft. Those are the fun and helpful ways that you can follow the show. Please consider rating or reviewing this on Apple Podcasts or any other place that takes ratings for podcasts, because it really does help us in the algorithms for getting the show in front of more people. 5 stars are always appreciated, and I give you a thumbs up when I read them, because I am that neurotic person who reads their own reviews. And remember, you can find subscription links for everything for following the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, all that stuff at bsforwitchcraft.com. Oh yeah, and I forgot to plug the Discord. What is wrong with me? The Nerd and Tie Network, which this show is a part of, has a Discord, which you can find an invite at nerdandtie.com/Discord. Additionally, we're part of a whole network of shows at the Nerd and Tie Network at nerdandtie.com. And you can find shows like the True Crime and History podcast, Poor Man's History, P-O-U-R, Poor Man's History. You can find great actual play shows like Let's Be Legendary, which is a 5th edition actual play show that's really great. I'm on 2 actual play shows, Stormwood and Associates and The Meat Grinder, which you can find both of those at nerdandtie.com. Also, like there's Famicom. There's so many great shows on the Nerd and Tie Network, and I'm so happy to be working with all of these great creators. I mean, Hex Positive with Brina Guerin, the other Witchcraft show on the network, is phenomenal and arguably better than this one. But don't tell Bree I said that, and we're gonna see if Bree actually listens to the end of this episode. Don't tell her show is better than mine. It's true. But, yeah. And with that, Magicians, I will talk to all of you again in a month. And Apollo has an OnlyFans.